Hello again, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for chapters 29, section 2, and chapters 29, section 4, speaking of the Middle East. So as we go along, make sure you find your place, and make sure you jot down the information that you need. Starting with chapter 29, section 2, super rivalries. The Suez Canal crisis in 1956 occurred when Egypt tried to take control of the Suez Canal, which had once been controlled by Great Britain and also France. Suez Canal, if you would take a look over here at the map, connects the Mediterranean Sea to that of the Red Sea. And it is a series of canals and locks that are basically between the region of Egypt, between kind of the isthmus, if you would want to call it that, from where a little east of the city of Cairo, and what is kind of geographically known as the Sinai Peninsula. Great Britain, France, and Israel in 1956, for the most part, attacked Egypt when they assumed control of this canal. And the Soviet Union threatened to enter this conflict on the side of the Egyptians. And the United States, well, it insisted that the Western Allies end the conflict as quickly as possible. And at some point in time it was. Egyptians, for the most part, they felt like they had basically lost a great business opportunity when the British, for the most part, were in control of this canal zone. And what they wanted to do was to nationalize the canal so that they could receive the money and profits that were used as tolls that the British, for the most part, were able to pocket. And hence, they kind of felt like this was kind of their right as Egyptians to have control of this property. Moving on, after the Cold War. After communism ended in the country of Yugoslavia, and we're talking about somewhere around 1989, 1990, violence broke out between Serbians and individuals from Bosnia-Herzegovina. This led to bloodshed between ethnic Serbs, who for the most part were Orthodox Christians, and Muslims who were living in Bosnia. NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they sent peacekeepers to maintain order. And just so you know, kind of a local note here, there were many peacekeepers that were sent to this part of the world that came from the city of Columbus. Many of them kind of stationed with the National Guard unit that is located down there. So you might know someone who might have served as a peacekeeper in the 1990s in this part of the world. The policy of trying to eliminate an ethnic group from society through killing or by forced immigration is known as ethnic cleansing. And unfortunately, that was what was happening. Many of our former Yugoslavians who were Serbs, for the most part, used this type of violence against the Muslims who were Bosnians. And what ends up happening is we have the establishment of what looks like concentration camps, the forced starvation, as you can see in the photos below. It was a really unnerving period of time, especially since it's occurring many years after the end of World War II. The violence ended in Bosnia in the year 1995 with the signing of the Dayton Accords. Yes, Dayton meaning Dayton, Ohio. And these accords have brought peace to this part of the world. On another note, talking about the Persian Gulf War that began, kind of started in 1990, and the war itself began in 1991. But the Persian Gulf War began when Iraq, led by a man named Saddam Hussein, attacked and invaded the little nation of Kuwait. This red area right here on the map, this is Iraq. Kuwait is located right here, kind of in the green area. And the reason why Kuwait was such a great target here for the Iraqis, aside from the fact that they're adjacent to one another, is the fact that Kuwait had a lot of access to the Persian Gulf, And sitting literally right beneath the nation of Kuwait is a very vast oil reserve. Some of this area kind of trickles along this green little blob here into Iraq. And the Iraqis, for the most part, felt like Kuwait had been drilling and pumping out too much oil. They felt like they had a stake here because some of that oil reserve kind of stretched into their territory, and hence they thought it was just for them to invade Kuwait to maintain control of this oil. The U.S. felt that the oil supplies in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia were threatened by this action, and as a result, gas prices did go up at this period of time. And so the U.S. led a multi-nation United Nation force that eventually would invade Kuwait in the year 1991, and eventually they would liberate the Kuwaitis. So they, down here in this region, this is Saudi Arabia, they staged their troops, they invaded, and they pushed the Iraqis out of Kuwait. So that occurred, but for the most part, our troops did not go beyond the border of Kuwait, pushing into Iraq. And a lot of people believe that this was unfinished business, if you want to call it that. As the Iraqi troops are fleeing Kuwait, one of the things that they do is they set fire to many of these different oil wells out here in the oil fields. And it created one of the largest man-made environmental disasters ever on record. There were many, many people exposed to some of these toxic fumes of these burning wells and have suffered a lot of health issues as a result of that. Number 3. In 1993, Palestinians and Israelis signed what is known as the Oslo Accords. These accords, for the most part, signed by the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, basically recognized Israel's right to exist, and Israel recognized the PLO as the representative body of the Palestinian people. The two men that signed this agreement, we have the Israeli leader Yitzhak Rabin and the PLO leader Yasser Arafat. These two men had been bitter rivals for many, many years. What's interesting is Rabin would later be assassinated, and assassinated by basically Israeli nationalists who were upset that he made any type of agreement with Yasser Arafat. This treaty was negotiated by former President Bill Clinton. In the fall of 2001, the United States government responded to the 9/11 attacks by launching an attack of the nation of Afghanistan. It's believed that many of the terrorists were trained in this part of the world, and hence we wanted to target kind of its organization known as Al-Qaeda. Along with them, we were also targeting another group known as the Taliban, which also had been involved in fighting in the nation of Afghanistan, and for the most part, they were very strict interpreters of Islamic law. Women, for the most part, living in that part of Afghanistan under Taliban control had to wear burqas, which were basically veils that covered them from head to toe. The Taliban ruled Afghanistan for a number of years, and they supported and protected members of Al-Qaeda, including Al-Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden. All right. Thank you very much. Oh, we've got one more page, I think. There we go. In March of 2003, the United States launched the invasion against the nation of Iraq. And part of this was, in a way, kind of the unfinished business that I mentioned before with the original Persian Gulf War. It is believed that Saddam Hussein was in possession of chemical weapons, or sometimes known as weapons of mass destruction, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in the future here. And he had supported many anti-American terrorist organizations, and hence he was considered to be a huge threat to the United States. Our military quickly toppled the Iraqi government, but weapon inspectors failed to find any biological weapons or chemical weapons. Saddam Hussein fled into hiding, and he was on the run for a period of time. Eventually, he would be apprehended and eventually put on trial by the Iraqi people and then executed. All right, thank you very much.